All right, let's talk about exercise 1.1, the rectangle class. So I read this over already before, but this is basically a exercise that kind of tests your knowledge on creating classes, using setter getter functions, constructors, and basically applying them into your main function. So one thing I like to do is just read the problem like in its entirety and then go line by line as I'm solving the problem, just so I don't get overwhelmed, and it's just a lot more easier to break this thing down than to try to tackle it all at once. So let's read. Design a class named Rectangle to represent a rectangle. The class contains two double data fields named width and height that specify the width and height of the rectangle, a no-R constructor that creates a rectangle with a width of 1 and a height of 1, a constructor that creates a default rectangle with the specified width and height, the accessor and mutator functions for all the data fields, a function named getArea that returns the area of this rectangle, and a function named getPerimeter that returns the perimeter. Then implement the class. Write a test program that creates two rectangle objects assigned with 40 and height 40 to the first object and with 3.5 and height 35.9 to the second. Display the properties of both objects and find the areas and perimeters. Okay, so like I said, let's just start line by line, kind of like how a computer compiles code, and let's just solve this. So first it says design a class named rectangle to represent a rectangle. Okay, we can stop right there. Let's head into our editor, create a new file. Oh wait, I have one right here actually. So let's create a new C++ file, and we'll save this as 9.1.tpp. And let's just set up our file here. So we'll do. Okay, so we have everything created here. And now it says it wants us to make a class named rectangle. So that's easy. Let's just do class and then rectangle, followed by a set of curly brackets. And don't forget the semicolon down here because classes are a statement. So this is our class, but there is nothing in it yet, and we'll get to that. So let's go back to our problem. Design a class A rectangle, already done. Now the class contains two double data fields named width and height that specify the width and height of this rectangle. And this is why it's important that I read the entire problem so that we don't get confused, because it says it needs two double data fields named width and height, right? So that basically means we need a double name width and a double name height. But because they're asking for an accessor and mutator functions, they more than likely want us to make the width and height private. And you'll get what I mean when we get to that step. But for now, just know that these are going to be made private. So we'll create a private section of the class. And in the indented section, we'll do double width. Don't set it. And we'll do double height and not set it. So this is our data fields. This is the data containing the width and the height of the rectangle class. And because we have a private section, we need to have a public section as well. And we'll do everything else under here. So next we need a no-R constructor that creates a rectangle with a width of 1 and a height of 1. Okay. So two things that we need to take note of is that this constructor has no arguments, and you'll see what I mean in a second if you don't. And we need to set the width and height equal to 1. This is basically our default constructor when we start using it in the main function. Every time we create a rectangle, the width and height will be automatically set to 1 if we don't give it any parameters. So to do that, whenever we're making a constructor, we always make sure that it's the same name as our class. In this case, that is rectangle. And then the same way we make functions, we follow with a set of parentheses and curly brackets. And then we'll just do width is set to 1 and height is set to 1. And this right here is our default no-R constructor. There's no arguments in it. We're just setting the height and width equal to 1. So whenever someone goes into the main function and makes a rectangle named R1, for instance, R1 will have a width of 1 and a height of 1. All right, let's see what's next. So now we need a constructor that creates a default rectangle with the specified width and height. So this is a little redundant, but it is practice. So I guess they want us to do this anyway. So this is basically a constructor with arguments, width and height now, which basically allows the user to create a rectangle with whatever width and height they so choose. And they don't have to make one with the width and height of 1. So very similar to how we made the default constructor. We type in the name similar to, exactly the same as the class with curly brackets and a set of parentheses. But this time inside of the parentheses, we're going to create two new integers, new double, sorry, new width and double new height. These will be the arguments that the user passes in to set the new width and new height. And inside of the constructor, we have to make sure that we have the old width set to new width and the old height set to new height. And basically what this allows us to do, or rather allow the user to do, is that whenever they call in, whenever they create a new rectangle object, they can follow up with a set of parentheses and then create like values. So in this case, let's just do 30 and 40. So now instead of this rectangle being created with a width of 1 and a height of 1, because we pass in some values, it's telling the compiler, oh, they're calling this constructor here, the one with arguments, and then it's setting the width to, in this case, 40, and the height to, in this case, 30. All right, let's see what's next. Now, this is the part that I was telling you guys about before that we would come back to, the accessor and mutator functions. Or rather, I like to call them the getter and setter functions. Getter and setter functions basically allows us, or the user, to manipulate or print out these private data fields without directly accessing them. This is related to the concept of data abstraction, and there's a lot more on this, but all you need to know for now is that these are private. They can't be directly changed within the main function. So we need to jump through functions that we create ourselves inside of the class in order to manipulate them. That makes sense? Okay. So it says we need an accessor and mutator function for all the data fields. In this case, that's just width and height. So we need a getter and setter for width, and we need a getter and setter for height. Let's just focus on width for now and just getting our getter and setter for width set up. So we'll do, for the getter, we're going to return a double. So we'll do a double, and then we'll just call this get width, very creative name, followed by a set of parentheses and curly brackets because it's a function. And this will simply return the width. Then for the getter function, we'll do void, and then we'll do set width, another very creative name. And inside of our parentheses, we want to pass in a new width. So we'll do double new width, and this will set the width equal to new width. So kind of similar to our argument constructor here, what the setter function does is allows us to change the width that is within the private section through the use of the set width function. So normally, if we wanted to change the width, we would just go into why not just go into our main function and just say, hey, I want the width to be 45 now. Well, as you can see here, we got an error because it says width is undefined. This main function doesn't even know what's going on inside of the private data fields, much less the class. So we can't just directly change it. Instead, we'll just call in our object and then the function, and then we'll do 45. And what this does is it goes into the class and it's like, okay, this is the set width function. Okay, so we're gonna set width to new width. What's the new width? What did the user pass in? Oh, okay, 45. That's why we have getter and setter functions. So let's do the same for height. We're gonna do double get height because we're returning a double, and then we'll just return height. And then next we need a setter for height, so we'll do void set height. We'll do double new height, and then within our curly brackets, we're gonna set the height equal to new height. What these four functions basically allow us to do is, like I said, to access the double width and double height that is within the private section without directly changing it in our main function. It basically just allows these to be a little bit more secure. If this was like a bank example, you would probably want to put someone's social security number and their account number and all that other secure stuff within the private section, and only allow it to be modified through the use of functions if need be. Let's go back to our problem though. So now we need a function named getArea that returns the area of the rectangle. So that's pretty simple. So we know the area of a rectangle is basically just height times width. And if you didn't know that, you can just look it up on Google. So let's create a void function called getArea. And then within this, we'll just return width times height. And you know what? Because it's returning a double, let's just call this a double function. Whoops. Then it says we need a function named getPerimeter that returns the perimeter. And if you didn't know, the formula for perimeter of a rectangle is basically 2 times width times height. So because we're returning a double value, we will return because we're returning a double value, we'll call this function a double, and then we'll say getPeri for short. I'm not typing all of that. So we'll just return 2 times and then parentheses width plus height. Yep, there we go. And I forgot my semicolon there. So these are like probably the most easy ones out of this problem in my opinion. These basically just, this one returns the area. We know the formula for the area is width times height. These return the perimeter, and we know the formula for perimeter is just 2 times width plus height. So now we're finally at the point where we have to implement the class. Now it says write a test program that creates 2 rectangle objects. And let's continue our theme of going line by line, and let's just stop right here and let's see if our constructors work. So we're creating 2 rectangles. Let's just keep it simple for now and have a rectangle named R1 and then a rectangle named R2. And let's print out, using our getters, let's print out the width and the height of these rectangles. So we'll see out R1 that get width. I'll do a new line character here. And I'm just gonna have to copy and paste this. Oh, don't forget your parentheses, by the way. I'm just gonna have to copy and paste this a couple times because it's a little redundant here. All right. So for R1, we'll do get width and get height, and for R2, we'll do the same. So let's just do get height here. And I'm just testing out the functions that we made for R1 and R2. So these 2 lines, they print out, let's just go from the top actually. So we created a rectangle named R1 and we created a rectangle named R2. And then we're going to see out R1.getWidth, which basically just calls the getWidth function. Same for the height. And then we do the same for R2. We're calling the getWidth function and the getHeight to display the width and height. And now remember, because we didn't pass in any arguments, we're using the no_r constructor here that we created when we first started the problem. And you can probably guess what the width and height will be since we have, created these with no parameters. Let's run this. And yeah, 111, it was expected. Because we created these rectangles with the default arguments, it's just going to automatically set the width and height to 1. And then we created 4 statements that display the width and height of both of these rectangles. So that's part of this problem done. We wrote a test program that creates 2 rectangle objects. But now it says it wants us to assign width 4 and height 40 to the first object, and width 3.5 and height 35.9 to the second. So we have to change the width and height of these rectangles. And there's actually 2 ways to do this. I'll show you guys both. But the first and probably easier way, I would say, is to use a constructor that we created here that, allows us to pass in arguments. If you remember, we created a no_r constructor that has default values of width, height, both sets of 1. But we also have a constructor here that allows us to modify what we want to be the width and the height to be. So we can pass in arguments by following R1 with a set of parentheses. And let's say they said they wanted width 4 and height 40. So we'll just do 40, 4, 40. And this will basically do the same thing as using our setter functions, which I'll show you guys in a second. But for now, let's just run this program and let's see if that changed the values or not. Yep. So now rectangle 1 has a width of 40 and a width of 4 and a height of 40. But rectangle 2 still has the default parameters, which is, 1, 1. Now, the second way of creating a custom rectangle, I guess I could say, is to use the mutator functions that we created. And I would normally just do this problem by, passing in arguments, but we didn't create those functions for nothing. Let's use them. So they said they want a width of 3.5. So let's just use our set width function that we created here. And in order to do that, we just do R2 dot call in our function set width. And then when it's set in parentheses, what are we passing in? We're passing in a double new width. So we pass inside of our parentheses what we want our width to be, 3.5. So we type in 3.5. And the semicolon preferably goes outside of the parentheses. And let's just test our setter function. So let's run this code. We should get 4, 40, and then what's next? Width, right? So 4, 40, 3.5, and 1. All right, our setter function works. So that's just basically two ways of manipulating the width and height if you have a setter or if you have a constructor that has arguments. But like I said, I want to show you guys both ways to do it. So let's do the same for height. So we'll do set height. And they said they want the height to be 35.9, right? So we'll do 35.9 here. And let's run this. Yeah, we changed it. So this will be no different than if we were to call in our rectangle or construct our rectangle and then put 35.9 followed by comma with 35.9 here. I said that wrong. Forgive me, it's late. This will be no different than if we constructed a rectangle with 3.5 and then 35.9. And this will basically do the same thing. So I'll just comment these out. Sorry, it's getting late. I'm tripping over my words like crazy. But yeah, we got the same result as the last run. But like I said, I want to show you guys both ways so that you're not stuck scratching your head trying to figure out why we created the setter functions. Also, it just demonstrates that we know what's going on. So I prefer you guys do it like how I did it here instead of just taking the easy way out and constructing one with the width and height that was using the argument constructor. All right, so we're almost done. Let's see what else. So we assign width 40 and height for it. We assign width 4 and height 40 to the first object and 3.5 and height 35.9 to the second. And we kind of already did this part where it says display the properties of both objects, but now we need to find the area and perimeter. So let's just clean this up a little bit. We'll see out instead of directly just the numbers, we'll just put some strings here. The width of rectangle 1 is followed by the get width function. And I'm just cleaning the output up. You can kind of skip through this part. I'm just making it so that it looks pretty. So the width of rectangle 1 is black. And then the width of rectangle 2 is this. And then in here we'll do the height of rectangle 1 is and then we'll copy the height of rectangle 2. So I was just making the output look a little prettier. Let's just run this again to make sure it makes sense. The width of rectangle 1 is 4. The height of rectangle 1 is 40. The width of rectangle 2 is 3.5. The height of rectangle 2 is 35.9. And then we'll just see out another inline just for clarity. And then we'll see out the area. Now, how do we use the area and perimeter function? So basically, we just grab the rectangle that we want, followed by calling in the function. So we want the area of rectangle 1. So we would do r1.getArea, followed by a set of parentheses. And that's pretty much how you do it. But let's make this a little prettier. Let's print out the area of rectangle 1 is, followed by our getArea function that we just made. What is the issue here? Okay, it just did an update. And then we'll see out the area of rectangle 2 is, followed by r2 dot get area. And let's run this again and see if it works. The area of rectangle 1 is 160. The area of rectangle 2 is 125.65. Let's just bust out our calculator to make sure that we did that correctly. So rectangle 1 is 440. We know that 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 40 will respectively be 160. So that works. And we don't even have to check the other one, but let's do it. So what is it? 3.5 and 35.9. So 3.5 times 35.9. And yeah, 125.65. So we know our math is right. Let's just copy paste this here and print out the perimeter. So we will see out the perimeter of rectangle 1 and the perimeter of rectangle 2. And instead of calling in our getArea function, we're calling in our getPeri function. Don't forget your parentheses. Oh, spelled it. And let's run our code. The width of rectangle 1 is 4. The height of rectangle 1 is 40. The width of rectangle 2 is 35. The height of rectangle 2 is 35.9. And the area of rectangle 1 is 160. Oh, God. Hold on. I want some inlines here. I definitely turned this into a string, but it's whatever. At this point, I'm tired, but we're basically done. Usually I put like single quotes for, the character, but I don't think it matters actually. All right, let's run this a little bit more prettier now. Here we go. We have the width and height of both, and then we have the area and perimeter, and that looks about right. So let's see, did we miss anything? Display the property to both, find the areas and perimeters. Nope, that is the rectangle class. Now this is a very helpful video because it's going to help you out with 9.2 and 9.3 as well, as it's basically the same thing with a little bit more flavor. But if you guys can follow along and understand this, then you can pretty much understand 9.2 and 9.3. But let's just go, from top to bottom and explain what we did. So we included our IO stream and used namespace std. That's normal. We created a class named rectangle. We have a private data field that contains the width and the height of the rectangle. Inside of our public section, we have a no argument constructor that defaults the rectangles created to height 1 and width 1. We created an argument constructor that allows the user to pass in values to create a rectangle with a width of the desired choosing and a height of the desired choosing. We created a getter function for the width that just returns the width. We created a setter function for the width that allows the user to modify the width if they want to by calling in the width function. We created a getter function for the height that returns the height. And we created a setter function for the height that allows the user to modify the height whenever they want to by calling in the function. We created a getArea function that returns the area of the rectangle. And we created a perimeter function that returns the perimeter of the rectangle. Inside the main function, we implemented the class by creating a rectangle named R1, and using our constructor with parameters, we created a rectangle with a width of 40 and a width of 4 and a height of 40. We created a rectangle named R2, and by default, this had a width of 1 and a height of 1. using our setter functions, we created the R2's width to set it to 3.5, and using our set height function, we set the height from 1 to 35.9, and then we outputted the properties of the width, height, and the area parameter by calling in their functions respectively. All right, that was 9.1. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you learned a lot. I want you guys to use the stuff that you learned here to do exercises 9.2 and 9.3. If you have any questions, you can email me. That's it. And I'll see you guys in the next one.